The inner dialogue is just speaking to itself. And justification is a big part of this inner dialogue. It's one, you could say, one story being told and another story trying to reassure that that story's okay. So this is the dual nature of the mind in the tradition that we are all studying. It discerns between the what they call the mind and the intellect for this very reason. Although in one way you can't say they're two separate things. Like you can say the trunk and the branches, but it's one tree. The leaves and the fruit, it's one tree. So different aspects of the same, the mind and the intellect. So the reason why we study the mind, and a big part of the satsang is studying the mind, or what we call the mind, because if we don't understand it, if we don't fully know how it functions, it can have a overpowering and thereby kind of controlling tendency in our lives. It's interesting to observe the nature of our internal dialogue. We all know that we think. But when you really look closely at thinking, what is it? It's one story being told, another story somehow justifying the rightness of that story. So this justification, it's very much in the reactive. It's always reacting after the point. A thought or a kind of narrative, which is just thinking, waves upon waves, telling a story, putting pieces together, really, making a picture. Gudrun always likes this idea of how the mind makes pictures. Making a picture and then making sense of that picture and putting that picture into context and putting that picture into familiar relationships. And then the sense in that familiarity is I will feel at ease. I will feel right. I will feel secure. I will feel stable. I'm stabilizing my story. But what do you think is not wrong with this? But why do you think that this doesn't really, is not so effective? We're all observing this tendency to do that. Why doesn't it ultimately work? Is the story of the mind really leading to a sense of security, doubtlessness, fearlessness, worrylessness? Or is it still just now another story within a story upon a story? Because the nature of the intellect is that it is also created to be doubtful. So we try to justify, I'm right. My story is right. My story is solid. My story is true. There's always a doubt. Well, is it? And because we don't look at that doubt as a mechanism or as a way that the mechanism functions, because we often don't see that unless it's pointed out, we double down and we just make the story more fixed, more right. And in that rigidity of our story, which is our ego identification, in the rigidity of that, we will find ourselves cutting off. You'll only be with people who tell a similar kind of story. And those who tell another kind of story, they are the others. And it is a kind of cutting off. Not only that, we are essentially not fixed. Life which is what we are, is fluid. And we're trying to fix ourselves, whereas actually we are fluid. Moment to moment is a creative unfolding of the moment. But if I superimpose that story on every moment, which is fluid, see the conflict here. It's like trying to fix the flowing river. If it would just stop for a moment, I will feel fine. And that's essentially the struggle of a human being trying to stop the flow of the river, trying to fix their ego identity, which means their personal story, their fixed ideas, their conditioned narrative, trying to fix it on life. Say, I'm living a great life. No, they are trashing. What is it? Rehashing. Thank you. Young minds are smarter. Rehashing the same old story again and again and again, and life is happening. What do you think? It's interesting in the satsang to become aware of this. Is it the mind's way of distracting us from uncomfortable feelings? Yes, that's absolutely another side of it, because it's never one thing. The mind is a very, very complex instrument. You can never just say it's one thing. But one aspect, as Moraine has said, is it the mind's way of distracting from uncomfortable feelings. So we have the field of thinking, just responding to what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste, how we move, how we experience. That would be generally called the mind, just basically information coming in. Then the intellect, of course, which is commenting constantly, and rightfully so. It has to comment because it has to sort all this information out. But as I said, the commenting turns into justification and this calculation of oneself, constantly placing oneself in a fixed position or trying to. And then the other aspect that Moraine has brought, another color on the canvas of this very colorful instrument, is the emotions, our feelings, and how that all plays in with it too, because feelings, like thoughts, are waves of experience. So we have this wave-like nature that is experienced as thinking, another wave-like aspect of this instrumentality that is of feeling, also a wave-like aspect that is of perception. There's also seeing the unseen aspects. And I always find if we're not sure about what perception means, I always find children an interesting study in terms of perception, especially very young children, before they've developed their intellect. Because their intellect is not able to keep justifying their story, they react to what they perceive. So that's why children, let's say, are very perceptive in the environment of a house. If there's tension between their parents, even if it's not spoken, even if that tension is not maybe in an obvious way a fight or a big argument, they're going to perceive the space. Maybe the parents try to hide it from the children. If someone maybe comes to visit that is agitated, the child will withdraw. They're not going to feel open to that person and go towards them. They're going to feel to withdraw because they perceive something in that person. So this whole aspect of perception is the energetic field. So we have the energetic field, we have the mind field, we have the emotional field, we have the intellect field. A part of the mind field is not only the accumulated story from the past, layers and layers and layers of the story that has been repeated again and again, but also the projection into the future. So we have projection also, which is imagination, which is just fantasy. It's going to be an Armageddon, and we have to prepare for the Armageddon. How much is the mind involved in these two aspects? History, rehashing, as Jesse said, rehashing old stories, imagining future scenarios. So this has also come into this wonderful instrumentality. See how important it is now to have an overview of this, so that when we, as we function, not when, as we function, as we talk, as we interact, as we make decisions, as we sit with ourselves, if we are aware of this instrumentality, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. Who is aware of all of this? And that is the step that Satsang takes deeper than just merely psychology, which is to understand the functioning of a human being, but to go deeper. What is awareness? What is consciousness? Meaning, where does all this come from? Or with what power is this all known? And that's where the meditation becomes such an important aspect of the satsang. Because the meditation is now not staying in the field of the mind, intellect, ego, senses. Did we talk about the senses? That's also another aspect. The whole sensory perception, I think we maybe talked about that. But to be able to sit and allow that instrumentality and that complexity of our mechanism that we call our humanness, to allow that just to be as it is. Just to be at peace with your instrumentality. To sit with yourself. Now, ordinarily, one is very familiar with the experience, our human side, the experience of thinking and feeling and deciding and sensing, perceiving, imagining. What is memory? All these things that I have described in depth. That is only one side. A whole deeper side of us is usually ignored and not known, and that is the deeper consciousness, or you can say the true self. It's like two sides of the coin. You're only ever seeing heads, thinking heads. You never see the other side of the coin. But it is one coin. You cannot have heads without tails. You cannot have thinking without consciousness. You cannot have a sense of seeing and experiencing and using language and making decisions and using your imagination and using your faculty to plan, to strategize. How do you use all of this? Who is the one who gives life to it all? Who can see this overview of it all? Which is to say, what is the governing power that brings it all together? The unifying power that makes it all one thing, one self, inclusive self. So it is recommended to us as yogis in our meditation practice. Don't struggle with the mind, and I'm saying that using now the word mind in its entirety, as I've described, in its complexity, in its multifaceted, multidimensional aspect, sensory, physical, energetic, mental, intellectual, imaginative, perceptive, in all its aspect. Don't try and change one thing. Can you just sit with yourself and not meddle, not justify, not explain, not try and find any reason, not looking for any cause, not getting into any whys, hows, but just to be still. Something starts now to reveal. The other side starts to reveal. But you cannot force it. You cannot think it. You cannot plan it. You cannot justify it. But when you allow the thinking, the justification, the emotional charge, the history, the stories, the narrative, when you allow that to all just be as it is and you be with yourself, it is a kind of unmixing process and an unmixing practice. But the practice is practicing what already is. It is not the practicing of reaching a goal. It is the practice of revealing by peeling away or allowing the unmixing with the layers and a kind of revealing of yourself pure and free and ever present and uncomplicated, unchanging. And of course, we know that the satsang always comes back to these words to try and point to or describe or to try and illuminate the self. Because if we don't bring our instrumentality to reflect upon it, we're only with one side of us, the surface level of us. And we never go to who am I as the pure conscious being? And then there's the struggle. Well, I want to use my mind to find that pure conscious being. And they say, no, sit in meditation. Meditation is not using the mind. Meditation is knowing I am the ever free observer. I see the mind and all as it functions. I am free. The I is always free. And we have to practice freedom. Practice uninvolvement, which means freedom. And it doesn't mean you'll stop acting. It doesn't mean that you'll give up your businesses. It doesn't mean that you'll leave your families. That doesn't mean uninvolved. Uninvolved means allow there to be some settling of that mixture. So when it settles, it can start to bring some clarity, some distilling. Because it always comes down to this, and that's what the meditation really is, a kind of sifting or filtering system. But it's so unique. Mostly practice is I'm practicing to reach somewhere that I'm not now, or where I'm not now, or to become something I'm not now. If someone starts to learn the piano, they're not a great piano player. They have to practice to become a great piano player. But meditation is the opposite. Meditation is a kind of reversing back to what you've always been and allowing all those intricate layers. Best how to sift it is not to keep feeding it and not to keep making it so real, but allowing this kind of stillness to do the discerning, the sifting, the filtering.
I was thinking about when one sits and awareness comes, the challenge for me at times is just to allow it.
Yeah.
There's because with awareness becomes, well, I am free,
Mm.
yet the struggle inside of me is saying, no, you're not.
Mm-hmm. That's really the work. And I would say I'm still
Yeah,
doing that work. And I have accepted
yeah.
that's the work. Absolutely. You know it. You know this knowledge is who you are. And that's what Swamiji said the last couple of years when people would ask him questions. Very often he would say, just accept. Just accept.
Mm.
And he'd say it so as if, please accept. Imploring, is that the word? A kind of
Yes.
imploring sense. Just accept. Just accept. And he would use the example, which is really, I'm finding it so profound. And I couldn't, I didn't realize it at the time when he would speak it, how relevant this example is. Said, as a child, you accepted ABC. We learned everything by accepting. We took on an ego identity by accepting that story.
Mm.
We've done it already. We accepted our false identity. We can also accept our true identity. Why not? If we are able to accept that which makes us suffer, that which makes us feel separate and confused and longing for unity, but only feeling a kind of emptiness within, and we accepted that. Not only did we accept it, we repeated it again and again, even though it led to dissatisfaction, unhappiness, into fears and worries and all of that. How can you now say that as a child, we didn't say, well, how is that an A to the
Mm.
teacher? The teacher just said A, B, C, repeat. And that's why they put it into a song. A, B, C, D, E. We all still know it. But Swamiji would say, just as you accepted A, B, C, you can accept absolute bliss consciousness. So it's an ABC of a different kind. But what is that innocence of a child that upon the clear canvas they accepted ABC? They accepted the story. You're a little girl. You're gonna be like this. You should be like that. These are the expectations upon you. These are the things you shouldn't do. This is how you should appear. Be nice. Be this. Be kind to everyone else, but neglect your own self. All that which we were told, we accepted. Why? Because we were a clear canvas. So this is exactly what meditation is. We have to become that clear canvas again. And that is the practice of meditation. I am a clear canvas. Whatever story has been placed on that canvas, the canvas has remained always the same. I am a clear canvas. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to clear all that color off the canvas. This is where people get into trouble. I've got to wash all that color away, all those layers of paint I have to wash away. And no. Or maybe they say, I have to paint another picture. And they do, they recreate themselves. People live many incarnations. I feel every decade of my life, I was painting another Rebecca. I always find it funny to say my name, Rebecca, because it really does indicate that created story. Rebecca was a created story. And when you realize, actually, I've always been the light of consciousness. I've always been that canvas. That's why this created person, that one decade was a homeopath, another decade was a school teacher, another decade was a student, another decade was a child, and another decade she was an old lady and people having to look after her. But all those decades that felt like another layer on the painting, still the canvas remained the same. The canvas is the very substratum, the very network, the very unifying factor of who I am. So I don't have to either recreate now another painting of me. I'll be happy with this image of me. I'll be happy with this, with these colors and this scene. And I'll paint myself in this way, which is where we started out the satsang, justifying our story. This story will be the right story. This is the story of Gudrun that's the perfectly patient doctor, totally organized and measured in her life. Everything will just be perfectly balanced. My energy will be always up and full and ready to take on the world and help all my patients. That is the Gudrun I'm going to paint. And you'll struggle your whole life to paint that Gudrun. And all the while, miss, I am the pure canvas. I've been the pure canvas all along. Yes,
I
Gudrun.
was never a good painter, so that's it.
Me neither. That's why our paintings were always messy. Maybe we did finger painting. But yes, Maria's right. We know this and we come to the satsang to hear it again and again. Why? Because it takes maturity and strength and power to accept it, because we are accepting it against a kind of force which is not wanting to accept. And Swamiji would describe that as a preventing power, because the ego now painted has to maintain itself. I'm this reality. I am this person. I have these qualities. And I have to not only justify them, I have to fight for them. I have to make them solid. These are my qualities. And if they are not respected, I hate you. And if you respect them and recognize them, I love you. And as we know, that doesn't usually work out too well, because love and hate go hand in hand. As all things have to go hand in hand, so that you're never going to array your life and the people in your life such that they're only always loving and appreciating you. You can't. Or that all circumstances are always favorable. Never. So trying to secure that ego identity is a huge struggle, but it is a kind of force also. It's a force of its own nature, and it's created perfectly to preserve its individuality. And it prevents us from, I'm not that ego identity. I'm not bound in that story. I'm not bound in that identity. I'm not bound in those pressures, that struggle. I am the free being, because there's going to be a very strong force for you not to be free. And that's exactly what is meditation. It is developing a counter force that is stronger than the preventing force. Basically, the knowledge of yourself, pure, free, unchanging, ever present, is stronger than the ego, because it created the ego. But when it is forgotten, when it is overlooked, when it is not included in our knowledge of ourselves, then it becomes weak, becomes sidelined, becomes buried. So we have to unearth this self that we are, the knowledge of ourselves as we are. And that is meditation. So let's take a little time. Why the satsang always leads to the meditation is exactly what Maria said. This is the practice of accepting. And it may not seem like that. You may not experience it as that because the story is so strong that it doesn't allow us to see this sifting process, this distilling process of the meditation, because in meditation we are not continuing to solidify the mental story, the ego's identity. Don't keep perpetuating that story. Watch how that story is known to you because you observe it. You see it. How can you relate to me about your story if you didn't see it, perceive it from within? Who is perceiving? Who is the one who is knowing your story? That knower both knows the story and knows it is free from the story, because it knows it created the story out of its own power. But it gave away that power to the story, to the images, to the painting, to the color, to the likings and not likings, to the experiences. And it became lost in all that very complex field of experiencing. But it could never be fully lost. Oh, it was only overlooked. One of Swamiji's first books he wrote, the title was Meet Your True Self Through Meditation. What is meditation? I am here. What is that here? It is simply pure being. Pure consciousness, which is meaning pure knowing. Pure observer I am. Pure is the unmixed, the uncomplicated. Free from any commentary, free from any justification. Simply free. I am free. As the pure being, I am free. And as that pure, free being, I can take on responsibilities. I can act and do my responsibilities or meet those responsibilities with energy, with clarity, with uncomplicatedness. Accept yourself as pure, free, ever-present, unchanging awareness. But just as you could not be forced to accept A, B, C, D, you just allowed enough time. You didn't go to school just for one day. You went to school again and again, and slowly absorbed. So trust that each time you take a little dip back into yourself, no matter what is happening in the thinking mind, no matter what stories arise or experiences or sensations, you are practicing accepting. I am pure, free, ever present. Cannot force it. In fact, the releasing of forcing is the accepting.